Costa Maya. It is not the most loved cruise port in the world. It is kind of like the neglected stepchild of Mexican cruise ports, falling far behind in popularity to its sister cruise port, Cozumel. And I will fully admit, I did not love this cruise port the first time I went. And in fact, it made the list of one of the 5 worst cruise ports. But now that I've visited many more times since my first time, I've come to like it. So Costa Maya, it can be a good time as long as you know what to do and what not to do. So today we're gonna dive into one of Mexico's lesser known and loved cruise destinations, Costa Maya. First, let me drop a little knowledge about Costa Maya. It's located on that eastern coast of the Yucatan Peninsula in the state of Quintana Roo in Mexico, which is shared by Cozumel and Cancun. Unlike Cozumel, which is an island, Costa Maya is part of the mainland. And that makes excursions to places like Mayan ruins much more accessible. So I love Cozumel, and you can do a Mayan ruins excursion, but that requires ferrying over to the mainland and getting into the Cancun area to do that. So a benefit of Costa Maya is that you can get to places like those Mayan ruins in a much easier way. Now, Costa Maya is an interesting cruise port because it presents an odd dichotomy between being really commercialized and then super underdeveloped. And I'll explain what I mean by that. But first, let me tell you that it was developed specifically for cruise passengers. So this is a part of Mexico, which just happened to be convenient in terms of being a cruise port location. So they built this up to specifically be obviously a cruise port destination. So the cruise port and the cruise terminal area itself is clean, it's modern, it's beautiful, it's cool. There's actually a lot to do in the cruise port area, but then when you venture out of it, it's kind of like you're in a very undeveloped nation. So it's a really interesting place. So if you're the kind of person that likes to bop around in the cruise port, you like to just hang out at the pool, stay close to the ship, you'll love Costa Maya. But if you like cultural immersion and you like getting out beyond the cruise port area, you might not like it as much. As a cruise port destination, it can accommodate up to 4 cruise ships at once. So on those busy days, that cruise port area can get really overcrowded. Now, one thing to note here is their pier is pretty long. So if you don't mind walking, it's not a problem. But if you have any mobility issues or you're traveling with small children, be aware of this. Now, thankfully, there is a free shuttle available that will take you from the ship to the main port area. It's pretty well run and pretty smooth, so that's a good thing. Something that might come as a surprise when visiting Costa Maya, especially if you're familiar with visiting Cozumel, is that it's really different. In Cozumel, most, if not all, of the vendors that you encounter are going to be fluent or at least conversational in English. That may not be the case in Costa Maya. And in Cozumel, US currency is widely accepted, and that may not always be the case in Costa Maya. While some of the vendors in Costa Maya will speak English, there are many outside of that terminal area, and a lot, in my experience, of the taxi drivers are not even conversational in English. So you might want to beef up on your Espanol or have a translator app with you to make sure you don't have any communication barriers. And don't just assume that US currency is king. Now, you don't necessarily need to go out and convert to Mexican pesos, but having a credit card, and I always recommend using a credit card, not a debit card, because unfortunately credit card fraud can happen in cruise port destinations, and you have a lot more protections on a credit card versus a debit card, and specifically a travel credit card, which gives you usually the best fraud protection when traveling internationally, and you avoid paying those international transaction fees. It's a good idea to have one of those with you if you're not going to convert and have pesos with you. Another thing just to kind of be mindful of is that, interestingly, the symbol for pesos is the same as the US dollar sign. So this can be a little confusing when you're looking at prices. So always double check the currency, do currency conversions on your phone, or have a general idea of that conversion from peso to US dollar so you don't end up overpaying by mistake. Now I want to talk about something important. Frequent cruisers often nickname Costa Maya Costa Maybe, and there's a sad reason for that. I now do like this cruise port, but it is pretty unpredictable. Of all the Caribbean cruise port destinations, this is the one that tends to get canceled the most. And it's interesting because it's not a tender port. It has a pier, that really long pier that I mentioned. And usually it's the tender ports that have an issue with winds preventing the tendering from happening safely. So usually it's those tender ports that get canceled because of high winds. But there's something about where Costa Maya is situated that leads to a likelihood of high winds and a combination of rough seas. And when that happens, ships are unable to dock there and they will cancel that port of call. And when that happens, usually the cruise lines, if they have enough notice and they can do it, will adjust your itinerary to call upon another port But here in Costa Maya, it seems like most instances that I've seen where they've had to cancel it because of high winds, it has been in a situation where they didn't have enough time to visit another port or reroute. So this ends up turning from a port of call day to an unexpected sea day. So if you're taking a cruise with Costa Maya on your cruise itinerary, just keep in mind that there is a possibility that you may not actually stop there. Now, chances are better than not that you will, that nothing will go wrong. But if you're booking an excursion in advance, an independent excursion on your own, just make sure that the tour operator has a generous cancellation policy and will refund you in case that port of call gets canceled and you don't get stuck on the hook paying for something that you can't do. And if you end up with a surprise sea day, it's helpful to bring with you when you're packing, and I'll drop my packing list in the comments, FYI, it's free, but bring a deck of cards or some other small game, because sea days, especially with kids, can get boring. And most cruise ships do have some games, but on sea days, those can be taken by other people or they're missing parts and pieces. So I personally always travel with a deck of Uno cards just as a precaution so the kids don't get bored. Now, if you are cruising to Costa Maya and you are fortunate enough not to have that get canceled, you will find that the port itself is designed to be a cruise destination. It's a really nice cruise terminal area. As I mentioned, it's new, it's modern, it's designed just for cruisers in mind. There's a ton of stuff there. It's not just your standard cruise restaurants, bars, and shops, but they have an aviary. They have lots of pools that you can use for free as long as you're buying food or beverage. They have flamingos and parrots. They have a dolphin encounter. They have that saltwater pool. They have a beachfront lounge area. Now you can't go in the water, but it's beachfront, so you can enjoy ocean views and get your toes in the sand. If you want to actually have a beach day, you gotta get out of the terminal. But while the cruise port area, it's a nice place to explore. Some visitors do refer to it as a bit of a tourist village. It is very Americanized, it's very commercialized, it's very cruise centric. It's not very authentic. So if you want to experience authentic Mexico, you gotta get out of the cruise port area and visit things like the nearby town of Hayhu. For those that do want to venture out beyond the cruise port area, there are a few options. And one option that is my personal fave that is starting to grow in popularity are the all-inclusive beach clubs. Now, my favorite thing about Cozumel that makes it one of my favorite cruise ports is I love their all-inclusive beach club culture. There are a ton of them, they're cheap, they're easy to get to, they're close to the cruise port, the food is usually really good, and it's just a really fun, relaxing day. It's a well-oiled machine. Now, Costa Maya, they don't have the options of Cozumel, so don't expect that. And in fact, I've only found less than a handful of all-inclusive beach places, and they're usually resorts that are kind of dabbling in the cruiser day pass market. I've personally visited two, so I'll tell you about them and tell you which one I like the best and why. One of my favorite spots is Nacional. I just got to visit for the first time. I'm actually going back in a couple of weeks, and I love a lot of things about this. Now, Nacional is actually a small boutique-style beach resort. It has very few bungalows that are meant for overnight guests, and they have started to, again, dabble in that cruiser day pass market. Now, what I like about this, first, is that it's a really short taxi ride from the cruise port area. And getting a taxi in Costa Maya is really easy. There's a taxi stand, they're lined up, they're waiting. You just walk out, exit the cruise terminal area, and the taxi driver may not speak great English, they may not take US dollars, and the taxis are not the nicest in terms of vehicle quality, but they'll get you where you need to go, usually. So it's only about a 10-minute taxi ride. It's a cheap taxi ride. And unlike those bigger resorts that you see at a lot of Caribbean cruise port destinations, Nacional is that boutique, intimate experience. And it is all-inclusive. So this means all your food, all your drinks, and I love that they have breakfast. So even breakfast options are included. Because when I visited, we got there a little before 10 a.m. and everybody was hungry for breakfast since we didn't eat on the ship. Now the beach area here, you get private beachfront access. Now beaches are public, but the loungers and the palapas and everything are owned by Nacional. And you get access to all of this. And the water is cordoned and netted off, which is nice because I was traveling with kids. There are always sharks. And there are some watercraft out and about. So it kind of helps keep swimmers safe. So it's nice if you're traveling with families. And I like that the water here is really calm. So not only is the water netted off, but it's just really calm. You don't get those aggressive waves. You can actually see the cruise ships off in the distance at the cruise port, which is really cool and makes for some great photos. And they have some in-water hammocks for lounging. Now, the one thing I did not like about Nacional is that because this is a public beach, this is like private access area, but it is a public beach, and it's along the Malecon or along the promenade, there are a lot of vendors. So they're gonna be walking up and down the beach trying to hawk their goods. So you will be approached multiple times throughout the day. And normally at cruise ports, I don't mind, like a lot of cruisers, I don't mind the vendors. I just tell them no thank you and kind of ignore them. Even I started to get annoyed because it was so constant. So that is one thing to be aware of here. Now, the great thing about Nacional is if you book a day pass here, and I'll drop the link below so you can check pricing, dates, and purchase your pass. And by the way, I do get a tiny little commission if you do at no additional cost to you. And that's just a great way to support my content because producing all this is very expensive. But if you buy a day pass, that includes with it round-trip transportation. Now, taxis in Costa Maya are not terribly expensive, but it's just a nice value add to your beach pass experience. And the way they do it here is you'll go ahead and you'll take a taxi from the taxi stand, you'll go to Nacional, and then when you're finished, make sure a taxi is ready to take you back. And the staff at Nacional take care of paying your taxi driver. Although I personally did tip my taxi driver on top of whatever Nacional paid them. So it was a really nice convenience, and I liked that I could come and go as I pleased. It wasn't structured in a way like we'll provide you with transportation, but you have to meet here between 9 and 10 a.m. or 9 or 9:30. I liked being able to roll off the ship when I wanted, enjoy my beach day in a relaxing way, and then whenever I was ready to go, to just on demand be able to head back. So it's hard for me to relax sometimes when I'm traveling with kids, and I was traveling with my 11-year-old daughter and my niece, and I really was able to relax because the water was netted off. It was so quiet and private. There was only one other couple there during our visit. It was divine. And I thought the kids might get bored because they don't have the banana boats and they don't have the big water inflatables, but they had a really nice time as well. Now, one thing to note about Costa Maya is this area is prone to seaweed in the water. We're very lucky that there wasn't seaweed on our visit, but they do have a tiny little plunge pool. So if you do visit on the day where the sargassum or the seaweed is really bad and rampant, you do have that plunge pool, but it is admittedly pretty darn small. Another thing to note too is, as I mentioned, the water is netted off and it gives you that private kind of water experience or water access. But where the Nacional is located, the water does have a lot of coral. So if you're the kind of person that likes to walk and kind of stand on your feet in the ocean, that presents some difficulty because you're so limited on where you can walk. So if you're visiting here, definitely bring your floaty. Now, another option that I have done that I loved is Hayhu. Hayhu Beach Club is quite a bit different than Nacional. They have some things in common, but there's some pretty stark differences as well. Hayhu provides a really exclusive experience. Like Nacional, this is a boutique resort. It's very small. They're very limited in the number of day passes that they will sell. And it's a little more upscale at Hayhu than it is at Nacional, although I found both to be very nice and I found the food at both to be very, very good. If you go to Hayhu, it is much further from the cruise port. That's the thing that for me gives Nacional the edge. It is about a 35-minute taxi ride. So not only is the journey longer, but heads up, if you do visit here, it is kind of back roads, dirt roads of Mexico. The first time I visited, I was by myself with my, at the time, 10-year-old daughter. And there's a moment where I started to think, am I in danger here? I normally don't feel that way on a cruise, but it was me and her with a random taxi driver that did not speak that great of English. Y mi español es no bueno. And also my phone didn't work. So there's a point where I'm bopping along on this bumpy, dusty road in who knows where, back roads of Mexico, thinking, what are you doing? But don't fret, it's just off the beaten path. Hayhu is much further away, so this is an excellent choice if you want to escape those crowds and you really want that private, exclusive kind of bougie experience. Now, what's cool about Hayhu is that it's not just beach, but it has this kind of interesting, lush, tropical setting. So you feel like you're in the jungle that has a beach. Now, the thing about Hayhu, it's very, very expensive. I'll drop the link below. It is expensive, but it can also be a bargain, which sounds like an oxymoron, and it is, but let me explain. The option that I'm gonna drop below is for a party of 6. So if you're a solo traveler, that's a waste of money. Don't spend your money. If you're a couple, probably too much. Family of 3 or 4 might be a good deal. If you're traveling with a group of 5 or 6, you've got a bigger family, you're traveling with friends, or you can link up with other cruisers that you like and you're like, hey, do you want to share this private excursion, this beach day bougie experience with me? And you can split the cost. It's a bargain because the price split by 6 people makes it much cheaper than almost any cruise line excursion you're going to get. Actually makes it cheaper probably than Nacional. And it's gonna be a really luxe experience. So if you're traveling with 5 or 6 people especially, you definitely wanna check out Hayhu as a great beach day option.
A popular option in Costa Maya that's more affordable than both Nacional and Hayhu
but isn't quite as luxurious, is Maya Chan. This is really popular with cruisers, and it offers a private beachfront experience with shaded palapas, loungers, and access to things like kayaks, paddleboards, and snorkel gear. And the best thing, it's all inclusive. Pricing does run around $79 for adults with discounted pricing for kids. Now, food here is served buffet style, so it's not as fancy as Nacional and Hayhu, but the food is generally well reviewed by cruisers. It also includes private beachfront access with use of a lounger and umbrella, things like Wi-Fi, and transportation to and from the cruise port. Now, it is important to note that Maya Chan, it is reservation only, and it does often sell out. So if you plan to visit, you should definitely book as far in advance as possible. Now, if you like to ball on a budget, and I'm a budget-friendly kind of gal, so no judgment here. A lot of cruisers love Krazy Lobster. Krazy Lobster is probably the #1 recommended destination outside of the cruise terminal area in Costa Maya. It's really unique because it's a beachfront restaurant. It's a short taxi ride. It's not very far from the cruise port at all. And it's certainly not going to give you that luxury and that privacy that you get with those all-inclusive resorts. Those include all your food and drinks too. But you do get that beach access, and you don't have to buy a day pass, but the expectation is, of course, you're buying food and drink. But the food and drinks here are pretty affordable. But before you bank on spending a day at Krazy Lobster though, I would look at their menu, which is available online, look at their prices, and try to get an idea of what you would spend on food and drink for you and your family for a day at Krazy Lobster, and compare that to the price of Nacional, because it might surprise you. If you eat a lot of food, like you have breakfast and lunch, which Nacional provides, and you drink a lot of alcohol especially, you might find a better deal at Nacional. And Nacional also, by the way, provides smoothies, which is great because I'm not an alcohol drinker and I really feel like I got some good bang for my buck. So make sure you compare that cost between the two, because free might actually not be the best deal. But Krazy Lobster, if you can go there without spending a ton on food and drinks, it's a really fun, casual spot. Obviously, it's going to be much more crowded because most of the cruisers do flock here. And you're also not going to get the best beachfront experience because unfortunately there's been a lot of erosion in this area. So the beachfront area has eroded away. So it's not the most ideal spot for just laying and relaxing and lounging by the water because of the crowds. So if that's what you're looking for, look at a place like Nacional or Hayhu. But if you're looking to just save money, let your kids splash in the water, Krazy Lobster is a great choice. Since Krazy Lobster is now such a well-known spot for cruisers, and because it provides such a great value, it does get really crowded, sometimes unpleasantly so. And obviously, the public beach, Hayhu, also gets really crowded, and that doesn't have the benefit of being all-inclusive. So another great lesser-known option that's pretty similar to Krazy Lobster is Jaime's at the Blue Reef. It's located down the promenade just a little bit from Krazy Lobster. It's about a 5 to 6 minute walk, or about 9 minutes from the cruise port by taxi. At a cost of $61 per adult, $22 for kids, or $34 for teens, this is a beachfront option that's similar to Krazy Lobster. Now, it's more expensive, of course, than Krazy Lobster, but it's still a good value compared to the other all-inclusive day pass options in Costa Maya. And it's going to be less chaotic and less crowded than Krazy Lobster. So it's kind of a nice in-between option for budget-conscious cruisers looking for an all-inclusive beach day experience. Now, if you want another option that is further away from the cruise port and not as crowded as Krazy Lobster, you can check out Playa Hayhu. This is the closest public beach to the port. It's only about 2 miles away. Now, it generally doesn't get as crowded as Krazy Lobster, but it's still close enough to the cruise terminal area that it can get crowded. And it can be more of a lively atmosphere, local vendors there renting out chairs and umbrellas. It is cheap and easy, again, to take a taxi there. There are always taxis there ready to take people back. So that is an option as well. Now, if you're traveling with kids or you seek more action than just a lazy day at the beach, instead of a beach day at Hayhu or through the beach bars or resort day passes, another option to consider in Costa Maya is a water park. Lost Mayan Kingdom is the top choice here, and it's almost always offered as an excursion with all of the cruise lines. Now, this park has water slides, zip lines, and a lazy river, and it can get a little pricey, and as a cruise line excursion, it can run around $100 to $120 per person for adults. But it does offer the full array of adventure activities. Now, this one is a little bit tricky because you can technically buy tickets on your own at the park itself in person on the day of your visit.
although I have been unable to find any option where cruisers can independently buy tickets online in advance. And that's a risk to try to get tickets in person because this attraction frequently sells out. Further, this is the rare situation where it's actually cheaper to book through the cruise line rather than going independent. So if you want to do the Lost Mayan Kingdom, your best bet here is actually just to book it through the cruise line as an excursion.
Now, if you're not a beach person or you don't like the beaches here, because again, this is a part of Mexico that is prone to sargassum, which is that seaweed. And when the seaweed is really bad, I hate it. It's disgusting. I don't want to go in the water. I don't even want to go near it. It's gross. And you unfortunately can't always tell when that's going to happen. So if you don't want to risk that, or you just don't want a beach day, there are other things to do here. And probably the main showpiece of Costa Maya are excursions to the Mayan ruins. The most popular site is Chacoben, which is a good distance from the cruise port. It's about 30 miles. Now, these ruins aren't as well known as the ones that you're going to find in Tulum, for example, but they do give you a fascinating look into that Mayan history and culture, which I've done a lot of Mayan ruins and tours, and I find it pretty fascinating. So if you've never visited a Mayan ruin site before, there are admittedly a lot better sites in Mexico. But if you don't get to Mexico a lot, you've never been, this is a really great opportunity to get that culture and get that knowledge and get that experience. And when it comes to taxis in Costa Maya, as I mentioned, taxis are readily available at major tourist destinations. There's a taxi stand at the cruise terminal, but note that taxis are generally cash only and they don't always necessarily accept US dollars. In most cases, they will take US currency, but not all. So always make sure you ask before you get into a taxi. Taxi fares here are regulated, so pricing should be consistent. But again, always confirm the price before you get in that taxi. Always confirm that they take US currency if that's all you have. And if it's pesos, make sure you have enough. You do not have to get in a taxi. You can say, nope, I'll take the next one. And make sure too that you can communicate with your driver because again, not all the drivers here are even conversational in English. So Costa Maya, it's a really interesting port because it is still developing. While the terminal area is super commercialized, as I mentioned, right outside of it, there's not really a lot to do. You got Krazy Lobster, you got the public beach, you got some of the resorts, but it definitely feels underdeveloped compared to places like Cozumel. Now, an interesting development about Costa Maya is that last year, Royal Caribbean announced that they're actually buying this cruise port and making it their new perfect day Mexico. Now, that's still a little ways away, but basically they're going to own Costa Maya as it exists now as a cruise port destination. Now, obviously the other cruise lines are going to work with the Costa Mayan government to develop an alternative cruise port because I don't foresee the other cruise lines just saying, okay, we'll never visit Costa Maya again because Royal Caribbean owns it. But exactly how that fleshes out remains to be seen. So we'll have to see what happens with Costa Maya in terms of the development of the area right outside the cruise terminal area and the maybe building of an additional cruise port, since now Royal Caribbean kind of has that domain in Costa Maya, or at least they will in a few years. And if you want the full scoop on Costa Maya, I have my free written Costa Maya cruise port guide that you can find on my website, along with lots of other free cruise information at profmelissa.com. But before you go, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Happy cruising!